Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear student teachers, Assalamu alaikum. I am Rashid Salim with lecture number 31 of Functional English 1. This lecture is going to be a revision lecture. First of all, you all deserve congratulations that you have completed the course contents of Functional English 1. And I hope that you have been carefully following the content and have been practicing it at home. And you must have realized the difference in your own English proficiency. Have you? You remember the first two lectures I delivered in Urdu, and probably some of you were not feeling comfortable whether you would understand me or not if I spoke in English. But in the remaining lectures, if you have been listening to me, I am sure that you can understand me 100%. Am I right? So that's a big achievement. Even if you don't do well in the final exams, you still have learned how to understand English, and you have been quite diligently, carefully following me. Well, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't prepare for your final exam. In fact, this is the right time for you to prepare and revise whatever you have learned, and make sure that you get best marks. Now, we are going to revise the course contents in two parts. Lecture number 31 includes part 1. And in this lecture, our objective is to revise the important themes and the important skills that we have learnt so far. But first, let me have a quick look at what we did in lecture number 30. In lecture number 30, we learnt how to identify and interpret visual organizers. And if you can recall, we talked about so many different kinds of visual organizers. We talked about pie charts, we talked about bar graphs, we talked about line graphs, illustrations, maps, charts, and we also talked about spirograms and so many other different kinds of visual organizers. We also learned how to convert visual information into verbal, and actually you looked at a list of useful vocabulary that you can use in order to describe trends, various trends. You also learned some common expressions for describing, and in the end you learned how to convert a visual organizer into a verbal report, into a short verbal descriptive report. So this is what we learnt in lecture number 30. It's time now to look at the objectives of lesson number 31. In lecture number 31, you will recall the course contents of the first 15 lectures. And while doing it, we will actually revisit and practice the key skills. So I'll ask you a few basic questions in order to remind you, in order to jog your memory about the contents that we have been studying. In this lecture, we will also revise major structures and vocabulary items that we have learnt, we have certainly learnt throughout this course. Sorry, not throughout this course, just in the first 15 lectures. So whatever major structures and vocabulary items we have learnt in the first 15 lectures, we will revise them here. Okay, now are you ready for the revision then? Great. Okay, you know, lecture number 1 included 2 sections. In the first section, there was course orientation. I introduced myself, and then I introduced the course. I introduced the strategies, our basic focus, and then the second section was about introductions. we learned to introduce oneself, and we learned how to introduce ourselves and how to introduce others in various different situations, in formal situations and in informal situations. And we also learned some common greetings like hello, hi, goodbye. So in order to welcome someone or in order to say goodbye to someone, we learned some very common greetings. So this lecture number 1 was really pretty easy, and since it was in Urdu, I think it was quite easy to follow as well. Now, if you can recall, in our course orientation, I talked about the strategies, and I said that you should practice. The main important thing is practicing English. So even if you have listened to all the lectures and you didn't practice anything, you probably wouldn't have learned anything. Anyway, let me ask you a few questions. The first question is, what's the difference between theoretical and functional English? You know, the name of this course is Functional English 1. So why do we call it Functional English? Why don't we call it Theoretical English? What's the difference? Great. You are right. In theoretical grammar, we learn the complex grammar structures even if we don't have to use them in real life. Whereas in functional English, we only focus on those grammatical aspects or on those phrases and expressions that are used in order to perform a particular communicative function. So it is really very practical. You learned how to make requests, how to thank others, how to invite others, how to give instructions, how to seek directions, etc., etc. So these are various functions, and you know, each of the lectures that you listened to was basically based around one of these functions. So functional English teaches us how to perform various communication functions, and it is really very practical, whereas the theoretical grammar or the theoretical English only focuses on mechanical structures and their drills without really applying it to real life functions. Okay, now we move on to the second section of lecture number 1. In the second section, you learned how to introduce yourself and you learned how to introduce others. Now let me ask you a question. What's the difference between the first and given names? You know, when you are introducing others, how do you introduce them? Do you give their full name, their complete name, only their first name, or you give their given name? By the way, what's the difference between the first and given name? You're right. In English, first name is usually the family name, the name which is common to all the family members, whereas the given name is the name with which you can be identified from others, you can be differentiated from others. So your given name is the name that identifies you or that differentiates you from other members of the family, whereas your first name is the family name. So if I say William Jones, William is the family name and Jones is the given name. That's right. Okay, the second question that I want to ask is, do we use the titles such as Mr., Mrs., Doctor with the first names? For example, do we say, let me introduce Mr. William? No, we don't. That is culturally inappropriate. We don't use these titles with the first names. And when we use the second names or the given names, we always use Mr. and Mrs. such titles with them. So we never say, please meet Jones. We always say, please meet Mr. Jones. And we never say, please meet Mr. William. Okay, great. How about greetings? You also learned some greetings. Okay, here's my question. When do we say, how do you do? Okay, let's first answer this first part of the question. When do we say, how do we do? How do you do? You're right. We say, how do you do, when we meet someone for the first time in life. If we meet someone frequently, we don't greet him with, how do you do? Okay, is it the same as, how are you? No, it's not. Because one difference we've already talked about. How do you do is used when you meet someone for the first time, whereas how are you is a common greeting, is a common greeting. You can greet anyone whom you have met many times. The second difference is that if someone says, how are you, it's a question, and you are required to answer like something like, I'm fine, thank you, how about you? But if someone says, how do you do, in response to it, you will say, how do you do? You will return the same question. And remember, it's a greeting, it's not really a question, so you don't have to answer it. So if I say, how do you do? You will say, how do you do, in return. Very good, great. Okay, so we have revised lecture number 1. Let's move on and revise lecture number 2 now. Okay, now in lecture number 2, we again had 2 sections. The first section dealt with expressing requests and inquiries, whereas the second section was about practicing practical classroom English. So, are you ready for the questions? Great. My first question is, what's the difference between inquiry and inquiry? Inquiry with E and inquiry with I. That's right. Inquiry with E is used for a question, when we want to inquire something, when we are seeking information. When there is an information gap, we use inquiry. Whereas the second one with I, inquiry, is usually used for formal assessments of a situation. So we hold formal inquiries whenever there is someone misbehaves, or whenever there is a question mark about the performance of some individual. We are formally given an assignment to hold an inquiry against that person. So inquiry with I is a formal assessment or judgment, whereas inquiry with E is used for seeking information, for asking questions. Okay, my next question is, what would you like to eat? Is it a request or an inquiry? You are right. It's an inquiry. What would you like to eat is an inquiry. You are asking the person about the food item that he or she would like to eat. Okay. Although for requests we also use would, and we also use the question format, so we have to be really careful. Okay, now we move on. The next question is, which one of these requests is the politest? Okay, I read them out to you. Can you inform him, please? Could you inform him, please? And would you mind if I asked you to inform him? Which one of these is the politest? If you said the last, you are right. Would you mind if I asked you to inform him is the politest of all these? And the second one is politer. Could you inform him is politer than the first one? So I have arranged these sentences or questions or requests rather in the form of least to most polite requests. So can you inform him please is polite. Could you inform him please is politer. And would you mind if I asked you to inform him is the politest. Usually the more polite you are, the more complex structure is used. So would you mind if I asked you to inform him is a complex structure. Secondly, I told you that second form could is more polite than can. All right, in the second section we learned practicing practical classroom English. And we looked at various situations in which we can use these classroom English. But here is my question. How would you encourage a student who is shy? So if a student is shy and you want to encourage him, how would you do it in English? Okay, let me first warn you here that sometimes a student takes a little bit of time before he produces an answer. And we start encouraging him. We think that maybe he is shy, whereas he is simply thinking of an answer. And we say, come on, you can do it, come on, I know you can answer it, it's very easy. What happens is that such kind of encouraging words might be counterproductive if we don't give ample time to our students. So if we have asked our students a question, we should pause. We should wait and we should give a little bit of time to the students before we start encouraging him, because he might not be shy, he might simply be thinking of an answer. Okay. Now, what's your answer to this question? How would you encourage a student who is shy? Yes. If someone is making an attempt, you can say, you are partially right, yeah, you are not far off, so just try again. But if someone is not speaking at all, you can say, the best way is to repeat the question in simpler words. Or you can say, come on, you can do it. Oh, it's easy. Right? So you can use such words in order to encourage your student. Okay, are you ready for lecture number 3, the revision of lecture number 3? Great. Okay, lecture number 3 was about social interaction, and here we learned some greetings and gratitude, how to thank others and how to congratulate others. So here are my questions. How would you congratulate me in the following situations? So I just performed Umrah. How would you congratulate me in English? Great. Probably you can say, congratulations, I've heard that you just performed Umrah. So how was it? I won a lottery. Wow, that's a great news. How much money did you win? I got promoted. Congratulations, you have been promoted. What a surprise. When are you going to give us the treat? My wife gave birth to a baby girl. Congratulations. May Allah bless you through your girl, baby girl. Or how is your baby girl doing? I moved into my own newly constructed house. Congratulations. I've heard that you have moved into a new house. So how does it feel? I'm sure you must be excited. Alright, so these are some ways you can congratulate me in the following situations. You might have noticed that I'm not merely using the word congratulations. Instead, I'm also adding something to it. Okay, now we move on to the revision of lecture number 4. Lecture number 4 is also was also about social interactions, and in this lecture we learned how to invite and how to respond to invitations, and we learned various expressions for inviting formally and informally in various situations. Now here are my questions. My first question is, how would you invite your friend to a movie show? Since you are inviting your friend, so definitely it's going to be an informal invitation. One example could be, care for a movie show tonight? Fancy going out for a movie show tonight? I'm going to the movie show. Would you like to join? So these are some informal ways of inviting your friend. How would you invite your boss to a dinner? And you would notice that this time your invitation is going to be formal. So one way you can do it is, I was wondering if you could spare some time to have dinner with us tonight. I was wondering if you could have dinner with us tonight. So these could be a few ways of inviting your boss to a dinner. Okay, here is another situation. You have been invited to a wedding party. How would you decline the invitation formally? Yes, there are 3 sections to it, or 2 sections at least. First section is that you thank the person for inviting you, and in the second section you decline the invitation, and in the third section you give the reason for declining this invitation. So it could be something like this. Thank you very much for your invitation to your wedding party. I'm afraid I won't be able to come since it's my daughter is leaving for Canada tomorrow. Okay, so this is how we can decline an invitation formally. Now, how would you invite a guest speaker to present her paper in a conference? Suppose that you are going to hold a conference in your school or in your college, and you want to invite a guest speaker to present her paper. How would you invite her? Okay, usually you would give a written invitation for this, but you can say, I would appreciate if you could present a paper on the upcoming in the upcoming conference that is going to be held in March next year or December this year. Okay, so these were the key phrases, questions that we learned in lecture number 4. We have revised them. Let's move on to lecture number 5. And lecture number 5 was about regrets and apologies. Okay, so are you ready for the questions? Here is my first question. What's the difference between a regret and an apology? So who will answer it? The difference between a regret and an apology. Regret means when something happened that you wish would not have happened. You regret it. Something happened and you wish that it had not happened. You regret it. But apology is that when you did something wrong and you feel sorry for it, that is called an apology. So you can regret on certain situations in which you are not responsible, but you will only apologize if you are responsible or if you think you are responsible for a particular situation. And although we can use the word sorry for both regrets and apologies, but there is a difference nonetheless. For example, if someone told you a bad news, someone said that he lost his job, you would say, "I'm sorry to hear that." Now, this is a regret. You wish that this situation had not happened and you share that wish with your friend, but you don't hold yourself responsible for this. Whereas if you forgot to inform your friend about an important news, you would say, "I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you this. I'm sorry, I should have told it earlier." Okay, that would be an apology. Okay, now my next question is, how would you apologize in the following situations? For inadvertently sitting in someone's seat. Inadvertently means unconsciously, not knowingly, unknowingly. So suppose that you are, someone reserved a seat, someone booked a seat in a bus, in an aeroplane, or in a train, and you are sitting in someone's seat. Now, how would you apologize? Yeah, you would say, "I'm sorry. Oh, is it your seat?" You will start with a question. "Oh, is it your seat? I'm sorry, I didn't realize that." Okay, how would you apologize for missing an appointment? "Oh, I am terribly sorry for not coming yesterday. In fact, I forgot it altogether." Well, that's not a very good excuse, of course. That might infuriate. So you had better think of something different. Like, "I'm sorry, I couldn't come yesterday because I got a flat tire of my car." Okay, how about apologizing for arriving late? "I'm sorry, I got late. Actually, there was a lot of rush on the road. Actually, I got stuck in the traffic." Okay, so these are some questions. Let's move on, and let me ask you now a little bit about grammar. What form of verb should be used in the following sentences? I wish I dashed the football match late last night. I feel very tired now. You are right. I wish I had not watched the football match. So we'll use the past perfect tense here. I wish I had not watched the football match late last night. I feel very tired now. You can also use past simple. You can say I wish I did not watch the football match, but I had not watched is more appropriate. Okay, how about the second sentence? I've lost my wallet. I wish I could remember where I put it, but I can't. Okay, great. So very good. You have revised 5 lectures already. Let's move on to lecture number 6. And in lecture number 6, we learned how to follow and give directions. And this was really an interesting lecture, if you can recall. And we looked at various city maps, and we found out how to locate places. And we also learned some prepositions, use of prepositions for giving specific location of things or places. And then we also learned some phrases in order to give and follow directions. So here are my questions. My first question is based on grammar, on prepositions. And that is, what's the difference between in and into? Both are prepositions, both in and into are prepositions, but what's the difference between the two? Yes, if you can recall, in is a preposition of place, whereas into is a preposition of movement. So we would say the boys are swimming in the pool. But if there is a movement, we would say the boys are jumping into the swimming pool. Now this movement is from outside to inside, and we'll use into. Whereas if the boys are already in the pool, we'll say the boys are swimming in the pool. If the boys are jumping from outside into the pool, we'll say the boys are jumping into the pool. Okay, great. Now here is another grammar point. Explain the difference between along and across by using them in a sentence. Okay, go straight along this road and you would find the bank just across the street. So along is in the same direction as the street, but across is the other side of the street. So when you go, if you go parallel to the street, you go along the street. Otherwise, if you cross the street, you say you go across the street. Okay, my next question is, how would you ask for directions to the nearest ATM or to the nearest petrol pump or to the railway station? Again, you know, it should have usually 2 parts to it. In the first part, you will politely seek the attention of the stranger. So you would say, excuse me, could you tell me where the nearest ATM is? Could you please guide me to the nearest ATM? Okay. How about the second one, the nearby petrol pump? Excuse me, is there a petrol pump near here? Excuse me, is there a petrol pump near here? Okay, and if you are seeking directions to the railway station, there are various ways you can ask it, but one of the ways could be, excuse me, how could I get to the railway station? Excuse me, how could I get to the railway station? Excuse me, Can you tell me how I can get to the railway station? Excuse me. Can you tell me how I can get to the railway station? Okay, great. All right, now let's move on to, let's revise lecture number 7 now. In lecture number 7, you learned how to give instructions. And in fact, we found out a particular method of giving instructions. So there were lots of instructions on how to give instructions. Here are my questions. My first question is, what are action words and why are they important for giving instructions? Well, action words are actually verbs. They represent certain actions. For example, sit, stand, move, place, stir, cut. These are all action words. So action words are those words, usually the imperative form of a verb that instructs to perform a particular action. And they are important for giving instructions because instructions start with the action words. Instructions must always be clear, they should be simple, and they should be short, brief. And they can be simple and brief only if we start them with a clear action word. Okay, so they are really important because instructions are given in imperative forms, and an imperative form of a sentence always starts with an action word. Although some instructions can start with the conditions set for that action. For example, you, instead of saying choose the papers carefully, you can say carefully choose the papers. Both ways are okay, but it is better if you start your sentence with an action word. Okay, now can you recall 5 action verbs for cooking? There were a lot of cooking verbs that you learned in this lecture, and later on you also learned how to cook chicken Kiev, if you can recall that. Verbs for cooking, action verbs for cooking. So if you cook it in water, it is called boil, or if you cook it in water for a long period of time over low flame, you call it simmer. If you cook it in oil, it is called fry. And if you cook it in lots of oil, it is called deep fry. Right? If you cook it only half while cooking it in oil, you call it half fry. And if you cook something in oil while you are moving or shaking the contents in the pan, it is called stir fry. Okay, if you cook something in the oven, it is called, the action word for it is bake. That's right. So you can steam, you can grill, you can bake things, you can boil things, simmer things, fry things, roast things, etc., etc. Okay, ready for the next question? How would you give oral instructions for making a cup of tea? So you see here you need to use the time words. You can say, for example, first of all, put some water in a pan and place it over the fire. Wait until the water boils. Now add some tea leaves. Let it boil for some time. add a little bit of sugar. Your tea is ready. Pour it into cups. Okay, maybe I'm not very good at making tea, but this is maybe I forgot that you should sieve it. Otherwise, you see, all your tea would be in the cup. But anyway, this is how you give oral instructions. Maybe I'm not good at making tea, but I think I can give good instructions if I have enough time to plan it. Okay, now we move on to lecture number 8. And in lecture 8, we learned mainly two things. We learned how to give classroom instructions, so this was in a way connected to the previous lecture. And we also learned how to write instructional manuals. So in lecture number 8, we learned to use instructions both orally as well as in the written form. Now let me ask the questions. Now, how would you give instructions for conducting examinations? Of course, there could be lots of instructions that you can give. But suppose that you have entered into an examination room. Now you want to start examination. Here is how you can do it. Good morning, everybody. Get ready for your exam. Please put away all your bags and baggages and helping material. Sit in the seats, in the allocated seats according to your roll numbers. Be quiet. Use your own pens and pencils only, don't borrow. Now be quiet and listen to me attentively. Okay, these are just few instructions that you can give for conducting an exam. But in fact, there could be plenty more. So if you came up with a different set of instructions, they were probably right too. Okay, now I'm going to skip the second one, writing instruction manuals, but there is just one question. What are the important parts of an instructional manual? You know, an instructional manual, your instructions, they should be properly ordered, they should be numbered, and they should start with the action words, and there should be illustrations also. Okay, so these are some important things that you need to keep in mind when you are writing an instructional manual. Okay, great. So that was revision of lecture number 8. Now we move on to lecture number 9 and we revise it. Lecture number 9 was about asking for and giving advice. The first thing that you should recall now is the difference between advise, A-D-V-I-S-E, and A-D-V-I-C-E, advice. Advise and advice. What's the difference between the two? You are right. Advise with an S is a verb, and advice with a C is a noun. So we say, please advise me. When we use it as a verb, we say, please advise me with an S. But when we use it as a noun, we say, please give me an advice. Advice with a C. Right, so advise is a verb and advice is a noun. Great. Now let me ask you questions. How would you ask for advice on dressing for a party? Yes, you can say, I'm going to attend the wedding party tomorrow. What should I wear? What do you recommend I should wear? And if you are traveling to the northern areas in Pakistan and you want to seek advice on that, how would you do that? Could you recommend a suitable tourist spot in the northern area of Pakistan? Could you please help me choose the restaurant? Help me choose the restaurant in the northern areas? How should I travel? Where should I stay? What should I take with me? What do you prefer? Should I go to Sawat or to Kaghan? Okay, so you can ask a piece of advice in a question form and using various expressions that you have learned. Okay, now we move on to lecture number 10, and in lecture number 10 we learned to read and respond to narrative texts. And let me ask you the question straight away. The question is, what is a narrative? The word narrative is derived from the verb to narrate. To narrate means to tell. Okay, so narrative is a narrative means telling a story, right? So when you narrate an action, it is called a narrative. Whether that action was real or fictitious, that's something different, but still it would be called a narrative. So novels, short stories, these are narratives. A diary is a narrative. When you report an incident, that is a narrative. Okay, what are the main elements of a narrative? Suppose a story, what are the main elements of a story? That's right, setting, characters, dialogues, and a plot. And a plot usually has different elements within it. For example, a plot must have a problem in it or a conflict, and then there is a solution. This conflict gradually leads to a climax, and finally it is resolved. The conflict is resolved either positively or negatively. If it ends, if it has a happy ending, then it is called a comedy, otherwise it is called a tragedy. Great. So these are the main elements of a narrative. We move on to lecture number 11. And in lecture number 11, you learned how to share personal narratives. Right? Let me start with the question. By personal narratives, we mean that narrate an event from your real life, an incident from your own real life. So how did you take your first ever class? Can you recall when you took the first class? How did you feel? I remember I took my first class at NIML, National Institute of Modern Languages. Nowadays it is called NAML, but then it used to be NIML. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it was back in 1997 or maybe 98. No, I think it was 1997 when I took my first class at NIML. And I was really very, you can say, feeling embarrassed, and I was feeling confused because I was a student myself in advanced diploma. I did advanced diploma from NIML after doing my masters, and I was a student of the same class, and I was given the same class to teach the next year. And I had a register in which my name was also entered in the previous class student. So I was very young at that time, fresh, and it was my first time experience, so I was feeling nervous, and luckily the students didn't give me very tough time, but I can recall that now when I look at it, it is a memorable experience of my life. So I hope you can also think of your first ever class experience. I wish you could share it with me. Somehow you could send your oral personal narrative to me. Okay, now we move on to revision of lecture number 12. In lecture number 12, we learned how to retell and summarize stories. And we learned that this was really an important skill, because in these days, time is short, people are really very busy, and in order to take, we don't have enough time to read lengthy novels such as War and Peace. We just want to know the summaries. Anyway, it is an art to summarize stories. Can you summarize the following stories in a sentence or two? Now, I hope that you have read these stories, because usually we teach these stories in school, so I'm sure that you have read these stories. The Foolish Stag. So how can you summarize it in one sentence or two? You can say that this is the story about a stag who was proud of his horns and always complained about his feet, but got into trouble because of his horns, and his feet helped him. That's right. Okay, how about the story, The Boy Who Cried Wolf, Wolf? So it's the story of a boy who told a lie first time, and second time he was not believed by anybody, because everyone thought he was telling a lie. Right. So these are not perfect summaries, I know, but I was just giving you an example. If you think about it a little bit, probably you can summarize it much better. Okay, lecture number 13 was about sharing life experiences. And in this lecture, we also learned to differentiate between present perfect tense and simple past tense. So my first question is, my first question is, can you share one most memorable event from your life? One most memorable event from your life. If you can recall, the most memorable event that I shared from my life was when I went bungee jumping. And if you can recall, a bungee jump is like a free fall. You jump from a high platform, usually on top of a hill, and usually there is a lake at the bottom, and it's like a free fall, but there is an elastic rope attached to the ankles, to your feet, and when you jump, you are upside down. It's like diving into the water, and this elastic rope, it brings you down and up 2 or 3 times before they finally drop you into the boat and carry you home. I jumped in Beijing when I was in Beijing, and that is probably one of the most memorable events from my life. There are many other, but of course I can't begin to share with you because we don't have enough time left. Now once again, I wish I could listen to your memorable events, but think of some and try to phrase them in your mind. Okay, my second question is, what's the difference between using present perfect tense and past simple tense? Right. So when we are narrating a past event and when we use a particular past time, like yesterday, 1998, we use past simple. So I say I graduated in 1996. Because I'm using 1996, so I must say graduated. I cannot say I have graduated. But when I'm talking about my experience and that past experience has some connection to the present, I'll use present perfect tense. For example, I would say I have visited China before. I've never been to Paris. Okay, so we use present perfect tense for a past event when it has some connection to the present. But we use simple past tense when time is mentioned or time is assumed. Okay, great. So let's move on to lecture number 14. And in lecture number 14, like lecture number 12, we learned how to summarize. But this time we learned how to summarize non-fiction. Naturally, my first question is, what's the difference between fiction and non-fiction? That's right. Fiction is a piece of imagination. In fiction, like in short stories, in novels, it is a literary piece of writing. You use your imagination, and all the characters, all the plots, they might be drawn from real life, but they are not real. Whereas in non-fiction, it is assumed that you are narrating the events that are real, or it is expected that the events narrated in it are real. So non-fiction could be a narrative report, for example, a news report. Okay, great. Now, can you summarize the following text in a sentence or two? All right, just give it a try. Take 1 or 2 minutes, read it first, and then try to summarize it in a sentence or two. Okay, so let's analyze it. What are the main important things here? One important thing is that a personal narrative captures true events. Another important thing is that it creates a dramatic effect. And we use a hyperbole or to illustrate a point or dramatic effect. Okay, and it affects the readers. So we can say that a personal narrative captures true events with a dramatic effect in order to move the readers, in order to impress the readers. So this is how you can summarize it. Okay, now we move on to lecture number 15, which is the last lecture that we would revise in this lecture. And lecture number 15 is about expressing likes and dislikes. And my question is, because in this lecture we also learnt the difference between gerund and infinitive. So my question is, can you explain the difference between the forms of a gerund and an infinitive? That's right. Gerund is first form of the verb along with ing, like swimming, playing, thinking, whereas infinitive is the base form of the verb with to, like to play, to think, to smile. Both gerunds and infinitives, they are used as a noun, either as a subject or as an object of a sentence. So if I say boys are swimming in water, swimming in this sentence is not a gerund. But if I say, do you like swimming, or swimming is a good sport, then swimming is name of an activity, it is name of, it is a noun, and therefore it is a gerund. Both gerunds and infinitives are used for similar purposes, for giving a purpose. Okay. And both of them are formed from a verb, but the difference in their form is that gerund has ing form, whereas infinitive has the word to before its base form. Sometimes it doesn't have to, and in that case it is called bare infinitive, like could you help him succeed. We can say could you help him to succeed, but we can also say could you help him succeed. So succeed is bare infinitive here because I am using it without to. Okay, now here is another grammar point. You are going to use a gerund, either a gerund or an infinitive in the following sentences. You remember I gave you a list of verbs that take gerunds or infinitives? Great. So I hope meeting him soon, or I hope to meet him soon. If you said I hope to meet him soon, you are right. They would love helping us, or they would love to help us. You are right. They would love to help us is the right answer. Do you mind to open the window, or do you mind opening the window? The second sentence is correct. Second option is correct. Do you mind opening the window? I don't fancy to go out tonight, or I don't fancy going out tonight. That's right. I don't fancy going out tonight is the correct form. Okay, great. With this, we come to the end of revision of the first 15 lectures. There are lots of other things that probably I couldn't cover in this one lecture. So I would like you to revise all these lectures thoroughly so that you be prepared for your final exam. Now let's look at the summary of lecture number 31. In today's lecture, lecture number 31, we recalled the course contents of the first 15 lectures. We revisited and practiced the key skills, and we revised major structures and vocabulary items. So hope lecture number 31 has really been helpful for revising plenty of things, and hope it would give you some preparation towards your final exam. With this, I say goodbye. Hope to see you again in the last lecture. Thank you very much.